Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 782, and today is April 7th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a good amount of news to get through on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it. Just want to remind people to subscribe to the all-new Kyle Anzalone show. There will be a new episode of that program out this afternoon, 4:45 every Monday and Wednesday, and I'm interviewing retired Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, so I'm very excited about that one, and I think you all will enjoy it. And additionally, follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. That's where I publish all my work. This show, the Kyle Anzalone Show, all the articles I write, whether they're for the Libertarian Institute or antiwar.com. All right, let's start out here with this article I wrote for antiwar.com on April 4th. Rubio, time is coming for Russia to decide if it wants peace. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested the U.S. is looking for Russian President Vladimir Putin to move forward with negotiations on talks with Ukraine more quickly. So speaking to reporters at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Rubio said, "We're not interested in, and I'm not accusing them of this, I'm just telling you, we're not interested in negotiations about negotiations, that we're not going to continue this forever." I think it was more of an explanation of this is our timeline, and at some point it will be clear whether you want peace or you don't want peace, and that time is coming pretty short. So while Rubio said the U.S. position wasn't threatening, he went on to say that Congress should add new sanctions on Russia if Moscow is perceived to not be advancing towards talks with Kiev quickly enough. He explained, members of Congress have begun to file bills to increase sanctions, so there is going to be growing pressure from Capitol Hill to impose sanctions that we're not going to be able to stop. In fact, we're not making progress towards peace. So the top diplomat said that the message has been made clear to Moscow that we need to begin to see real progress or we'll have to conclude they're not interested in peace. Rubio said that message was relayed through Kirill Dmitriev, the CEO of Russia's Direct Investment Fund, a Russian government sovereign wealth fund, who was in the U.S. for talks with President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff this week. While Rubio said Washington would know within weeks, not months, if Moscow wanted to make a deal, Reuters reported on Thursday that the Trump administration will be unable to secure a Ukraine peace deal in the next few months and are drawing up plans to pressure both Kiev and Moscow. The Kremlin also says the two sides are far apart on reaching a deal. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said on Tuesday that Russia couldn't accept U.S. proposals on ending the war in Ukraine. U.S. officials noted that President Trump has become increasingly frustrated with Russian President Vladimir Putin for delaying talks after initially placing blame on Ukrainian President Zelensky. On Sunday, Trump said he was pissed off at Putin and threatened to place secondary tariffs on Russia. So, next up here, Zelensky slams U.S. response to Russian strike that killed children. So on Saturday, the Ukrainian President Zelensky criticized the U.S. for its response to a Russian missile strike that hit a central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih, also known as the COI region, on Friday. Ukrainian officials said the missile strike killed 20 people, including 9 children, and injured dozens more. Russia took credit for the attack and claimed that it targeted Ukrainian military commanders and foreign military advisors they were meeting at a restaurant. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed the strike made the enemy lose up to 85 service members and military officers from foreign countries, but offered no evidence for this assertion. U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Bridget Brink responded to the attack, writing on X, "Horrified that tonight a ballistic missile struck near a playground and restaurant. This is why the war must end." Zelensky slammed the U.S. ambassador for not mentioning Russia by name. Zelensky said, "Unfortunately, the reaction of the U.S. Embassy was an unpleasant surprise. Such a powerful country, such a powerful nation, and such a weak reaction. They aren't even afraid. They are even afraid to say the word Russia, speaking about a missile that killed children. Yes, the war must end, but to end it, we must not be afraid to call things by their names." Zelensky called for more pressure and sanctions on Russia and for President Trump to help Ukraine acquire more air defenses. He said, "We count on our agreement with the President of the United States, who promised to help us find more Patriots." On Sunday, Brink wrote on another X post that mentioned the same attack and named Russia, "We stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine on this day of a national mourning after a Russian missile attack in the region killed 20, including 9 children." Zelensky's harsh criticism of the U.S. comes amid faltering negotiations between Ukraine and Russia and signs from the Trump administration that the U.S. is ready to continue fueling the proxy war if the peace talks fail. After a brief pause, the U.S. has continued to provide military aid and intelligence to Ukraine, despite Zelensky's frequent criticism of the U.S. and his seeming unwillingness to make concessions for a lasting peace deal with Russia. All right, so next up here, Israeli official, Palestinians will be removed from Gaza after Hamas eliminated. So an Israeli official made it clear that Tel Aviv plans to expel Palestinians from Gaza after the hostages are freed and Hamas is eliminated. Throughout the conflict, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly claimed that the goal of the military operations in Gaza was returning the Israeli captives and removing Hamas from power, and denied that Israel's goal was genocide, which, again, the Israeli ministers are now making clear. So according to Haaretz, a senior Israeli official who was traveling with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained, "What we would like to see is that we rescue the hostages, eliminate Hamas, and that there is a large-scale opportunity for voluntary migration." Israeli officials have used the phrase voluntary migration to describe Tel Aviv's process of removing all Palestinians from Gaza. After President Donald Trump returned to office, he declared that Palestinians should be removed from Gaza and resettled in other countries. Since October 7, 2023, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said his war aims were only to eliminate Hamas and return the hostages, denying that Israel's objective was genocide. On Thursday, the Times of Israel reported that Hamas again offered to release all the captives in exchange for a permanent ceasefire. The outlet explained, again, this is the Times of Israel, explained that Tel Aviv has a long-standing rejection to this type of deal. The senior official that spoke with Haaretz said that at this point, Israel is focused on applying military pressure on Hamas, and explains who says the enemy won't break. Some captors may want to escape, allowing us to extract people. Over the past 18 months, the vast majority of living Israelis that were freed from Gaza were released by Hamas during the 2 ceasefire period. Scores of hostages in Gaza have died in Gaza, including some killed by Israeli bombs and soldiers. When the senior official was asked if Tel Aviv was concerned that resuming fighting in Gaza will lead to the deaths of more captives, they explained, "It doesn't matter if they die. It does. It's terrible, but they are still suffering." The official said that Tel Aviv was very serious about implementing Trump's plan. Last month, Netanyahu ordered Israeli intelligence agency Mossad to find countries to take in Gazans once they are expelled from Israel. In recent weeks, the number of countries that have been approached by Washington or Tel Aviv about resettling Palestinians. So far, these nations have rejected the proposal or denied that an offer was made. The senior official said some countries were receptive, but were looking for something in return. He explained they want something in return, not necessarily money, but something strategic. And so if you're thinking about Sudan, it may be that they're going to give the Sudanese military weapons needed to win the civil war. In Somalia, Somaliland might get recognition. The government in Mogadishu could be offered help fighting Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab. Same with Puntland, where, again, this is a breakaway region in Somalia where they could be given recognition of their independence independence along with help in fighting back ISIS in Syria. We could give the government their recognition. So there's plenty the U.S. has and may trade. Just very disturbing that we would do this all in the benefit of an Israeli genocide. All right, so next up here, Israeli strikes on Gaza killed 43 more Palestinians, including many children. So on Sunday, the Israeli military killed at least 43 Palestinians in the Strip, medical sources told Al Jazeera, as U.S.-backed Israeli strikes continue to pound targets across the strips. Photos and videos coming out of Gaza show that many children were among the dead and wounded. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, at least 9 children were killed by Israeli shelling and airstrikes on the Al-Tafa neighborhood of Gaza City. Heavy Israeli attacks also hit southern Gaza, and at least 19 Palestinians were killed by a strike on the southern city of Khan Yunis. Israeli troops have expanded their ground offensive in the area to capture territory between Khan Yunis and Rafah. Gaza's government media office said Sunday that since Israel restarted its genocidal war on March 8th, which it did with full U.S. support, 490 Palestinian children have been killed. The office said in a statement that the overall death toll had reached 1,350. The numbers alone aren't sufficient to confirm the existence of systematic and deliberate policy of killing Palestinian children in Gaza Strip at the hands of the Israeli occupation army, the statement from the media office said. Also on Sunday, the Israeli military said 10 rockets were fired from Gaza, an attack Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam Brigade, took credit for. Most of the projectiles were intercepted, but one landed in the Israeli city of Ashkelon. According to the Times of Israel, one man was lightly wounded and several other Israelis were treated for acute anxiety. And so I think this does go to show that there is, Hamas is not almost beaten. And we've known that based on their recruitment, but they're also able to still launch some fairly, sophisticated missiles into Israel, enough that they actually bypass the air defenses and hit the ground. All right, so U.S. military buildup in the Middle East is ongoing. U.S. deploys second THAAD missile system to Israel amid Iran tensions. So the U.S. has deployed a second thermal high-altitude area defense, or THAAD battery, to Israel, multiple Israeli and Arab media sources have reported. Israeli security sources also said that the U.S. deployed 2 Patriot air defense batteries to Israel. The U.S. previously told the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. was sending Patriot systems to defend U.S. air bases and nearby allies as part of its military buildup in the Middle East that's aimed at Iran. The U.S. has also sent a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East and deployed additional B-2 bombers to its base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean and sent other additional air assets to the region. The Biden administration sent a THAAD system to Israel, about 100 troops to operate in October of 2024, ahead of an Israeli attack on Iran. The first Trump administration temporarily deployed a THAAD to Israel for a military exercise in 2019. The THAAD system the Biden administration deployed to Israel remains there, meaning 2 out of the 7 THAAD batteries the U.S. operates are now based in the country. The deployment of the second system and 2 Patriot air batteries to Israel and hundreds of more troops could be headed to the country as well. The deployment is a strong show of support for Israel amid its genocidal war in Gaza, ramped up military operations in the West Bank, and continued occupation of southern Lebanon and southern Syria. The deployment comes amid reports that the U.S. and Israel are planning to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, even though U.S. intelligence agencies recently reaffirmed that Tehran is not attempting to build a nuclear weapon. All right, next up here, this one on Lebanon from Jason Ditz. Israel has continued to attack its attacks on southern Lebanon throughout the weekend, killing a Hamas commander and his family in a drone strike on Sidon overnight Friday into Saturday. On Sunday, the strikes were a lot less specific about who they were targeting, but they killed at least 2 people and wounded several others. The 2 people killed in the attack were an on an engineering truck headed to a city along the southern coast. The trucks were in a different village at the time, just a couple miles from their destination. Israel claimed the people in the area engineering truck were Hezbollah operatives. In reality, the vehicles targeted in various attacks appear to be involved in construction and repairs as they are working to fix the agricultural areas destroyed in the recent Israeli occupation. Other attacks targeted a bulldozer and people working in the farmland area, wounding 7 more. And so again, this occupation in southern Lebanon isn't just about defeating Hezbollah. It's about defeating the Lebanese people and making sure that they can't live in this region so Israel could take it for their own. All right. Israel troops detain civilians, block roads as they move deeper into Syria. Again, this one from Jason Ditz. Israeli troops continue to move deeper into Syria, raising concerns among the locals that as they detain civilians on suspicion of terrorism and set up roadblocks to prevent villagers from accessing their lands inside the newly occupied buffer zone. That buffer zone has gotten bigger and bigger, crossing beyond the demilitarized zone between Syria and the occupied Golan Heights, and has resulted in shrinking the amount of land local residents have access to. Israel invaded in December after the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, and its ever-expanding occupation has shown increasing signs of becoming more or less permanent. Though the Syrians involved are viewing it in the lens of occupation, the Israeli army is looking to brand it as a opportunity for Israel to travel during Passover, and it's just about taking more territory. All right, wrapping up with some stories on Yemen here. This first one I wrote for antiwar.com on the 4th, reprinted at the Institute on the 6th. Pentagon admits strikes have limited success in Yemen and are coming at a high cost. So the Department of Defense officials are telling Congress behind closed doors that it does not believe the new military campaign in Yemen has degraded the Houthis' military capabilities. Within a month, the operations will cost over $1 billion. According to the New York Times, the Pentagon informed Capitol Hill that the new operations against the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, have had limited success. The Houthis have reinforced their underground bunkers, frustrating the White House. The private assessment to Congress is far different from the public message from the White House, which this is a statement from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt last week. These Houthi strikes have been incredibly successful. The last time I was at this podium, there were more than 100 successful strikes. Now that there has been over 200 successful strikes, Iran is incredibly weakened as a result of these attacks. So on March 15th, President Donald Trump announced that he would restart President Joe Biden's bombing campaign in Yemen at an accelerated pace. In January 2024, Biden ordered his Pentagon to attack the Houthis after the group closed the Red Sea to Israeli-linked shipping in an effort to pressure Tel Aviv to end its genocide in Gaza. Biden's attacks on Yemen proved ineffective as Ansar Allah expanded the blockade of shipping to include U.S.-linked commerce. The group has also attacked U.S. warships in the region and conducted direct missile and drone strikes on Israel. In January, Hamas and Tel Aviv reached a ceasefire and hostage deal, leading Ansar Allah to lift its blockade and end attacks on U.S. warships in Israel. After Tel Aviv broke that agreement, the Houthis announced they would reimpose their blockade on Israeli-linked shipping. In now infamous Sindel chat, Trump's top national security officials discussed resuming the bombing of Yemen. Vice President J.D. Vance was the only participant in the chat to dissent, claiming that the bombing campaign benefited Europe at the expense of the American taxpayer. Vance did not note that the primary beneficiary of the policy is Tel Aviv. In the Sindel chat, several officials celebrated the bombing of an apartment building in Yemen's capital city, believing Ansar Allah official was inside the structure. That target was hit with intelligence from Tel Aviv. Officials speaking with the Times confirmed the Defense Department continues to use Israeli intelligence to generate targets in Yemen. During the first week of the bombing in Yemen, at least 25 civilians were killed in the U.S. strikes. Yemeni officials say a total of over 60 civilians have died from the American bombs. Following the U.S. resumption of the bombing of Yemen, the Houthis have also restarted targeting U.S. warships and Israel with missiles. The Trump administration officials have stated that bombing of Yemen will successfully deter Ansar Allah, even though the policy failed under the previous administration. They argue the heavier strikes will erode the Houthis' military capabilities. While the Pentagon said the renewed bombing campaign has not degraded the Houthi power, it has come at a significant price. The Times reported that the Pentagon has spent $200 million on munitions to strike Yemen. The additional deployments of 2 aircraft carriers, strike groups, and B-2 bombers will push the total cost of the operations to over $1 billion sometime this week. The price of striking Yemen is so high, in part due to Ansar Allah's air defense capabilities. In recent weeks, the Houthis have downed multiple Reaper drones. This has led the Pentagon to use longer-range missiles to strike Houthi targets. Some Defense Department officials have expressed concern that the administration is using too many munitions in Yemen and degrading the military's ability to fight a potential war with China over Taiwan. All right, next up here, Yemeni media says Trump shared footage of a U.S. strike on a religious gathering. So on Saturday, Yemen's Saba news agency reported that the footage shared by President Donald Trump showed a U.S. strike in Yemen hit a religious gathering, not a Houthi military meeting as the president claimed. Trump posted a video on his social media which showed a group of people gathered in a large circle who were then bombed. The president wrote, "These Houthis gathered for instructions on an attack. Oops, there will be no attack by these Houthis." The Trump administration, or Trump himself, added that the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, will never sink our ships again, although there has been no known incident of the Yemeni group sinking an American ship. In response to the post, a source told Saba that the video showed an airstrike on the gathering for Eid, the Muslim holiday that marks the end of Ramadan. The source explained that the video clip published by the criminal Trump claiming that it was a gathering of military leaders was merely an event for a social Eid visit in the Hadeda province. The report said the source emphasized that those present at the gathering had no connection to operations carried out by the Yemeni armed forces, which are implementing the decision to ban navigation on ships linked to American and the Israeli enemies, as the criminal Trump claimed. Muhammad al-Houthi, a senior member of Ansar Allah's political council, said the video was evidence of a U.S. intelligence failure. This video published by Trump and the situation of visitors attest to the falsely what he said. The video published, in fact, the targeting of an Eid social gathering. So users on social media were quick to point out the circle of people resembled a common way Yemeni tribes gather. A member of the U.S. and Saudi-backed Yemeni government in exile, which is based in Saudi Arabia, claimed that the strike killed 70 Houthi fighters and several Iranian advisors, but offered no evidence for this claim. And let me just remind you, we just discussed in the previous article how the Department of Defense admitted that the Houthis had reinforced bunkers, and so why would they meet out in the open? This is a group that has, for the majority of the past decade, been under a Western air war, either the Saudi one that was backed by the United States, all U.S. weapons, or, over the past year, Biden and Israel bombing them. So it seems really unlikely that the Houthis would have an open gathering of this many other soldiers, understanding that it would likely be bombed and that would come at high casualties. All right. So 4 reported killed by U.S. airstrike on home in Yemen's capital. This is the last story we have today. At least 4 people were killed by a U.S. airstrike on a residential building in Yemen's capital of Sana'a on Sunday night. Yemen's Saba news agency reported, citing local authorities. The report said that 2 women were among the 4 killed and another 23 were injured, including 11 women and children. The attack also damaged multiple homes in the area. Yemen's health ministry said earlier in the day that the overnight U.S. airstrikes on the northern Sada province had killed at least 2 civilians and wounded 4 others. The strikes hit a solar panel shop in a nearby home, and my guess is that the U.S. doesn't have, and since they're using Israeli intelligence, they probably have no good actual intelligence, and a lot of our strikes are probably killing civilians, as the Yemeni media is reporting. All right, everybody, that's what I'll wrap it up for today. Just a reminder, subscribe to the Kyle Anzalone Show channel, because I will be interviewing Colonel Karen later today. I'm very excited for that one. I think you guys will enjoy it.